Hello, welcome to Blogging Heads. I'm Chris Hayes. I'm the Washington editor of The Nation magazine, and I am here with Tim Carney. Tim, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Chris. Tim Carney. I'm the lobbying editor and a columnist at the Washington Examiner, and recently I'm the author of Obamanomics, a new book out with a long subtitle I can't actually remember off the top of my head right
now. It's a book I would recommend, despite the fact that certain parts of it I disagree with vociferously, but it's quite good. And I would also note that every paper in America should have a lobbying editor.
I agree. Well, not necessarily, because that's competition with me. So.
Right, well, that's right. Yeah, I guess you have a monopoly right now. But so we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm adjusting the camera here a little bit, which will be annoying the folks at home. We probably, as every Blogging Heads discussion for the past year has spent a lot of time on, we should talk some healthcare. We had a deal apparently being brokered right now. The House and Senate Democratic leadership is meeting in the White House essentially round the clock the last 2 days, and union leaders were brought in, and it sounds like a deal was reached on what's been called the so-called Cadillac tax plan. You want to describe the contours of that deal? When I read it, I said, "Oh Jesus, this is real Carney bait."
Yeah, well, it's special interest politics at its most blatant. One of the ways to raise money, obviously, for the healthcare bill, is to tax healthcare plans. And there's been many proposals to do this. In fact, one of the proposals Obama attacked the most during the campaign of John McCain's was the idea of getting rid of the special tax treatment of employer-based healthcare and just saying there will be, that will be taxable income, and employers won't be able to deduct their contributions. I guess employers would still be able to deduct their contributions, but when you're pocketing the benefit, it would be taxable income.
That's right.
And so but that Obama attacked it. I think it would have politically been too hard for him to go back on it, even though there were a lot of progressives who supported that sort of idea, even if not in McCain's specific way. So now taxing the most generous healthcare plans, which makes some sense from a policy point of view, which is because those most generous plans are the ones that, at least in theory, I haven't seen data on this, would lead to the most waste of healthcare resources because it's totally offloading the plans. But of course, politically, the people who have the most generous healthcare plans tend to be the labor union members.
Of subsection, we should say. I mean, it's actually not true if you actually look at the raw numbers.
Are they mostly CEOs or?
Yeah, well, they're mostly people who make a lot of money. So there's a lot of people in the country who, in absolute terms, make a lot of money and have generous compensation packages. But of the people that don't, most people who are affected would be people who have healthcare packages that are equal in size generally to large compensation packages, and a subset. But a sizable subset of those people are union members who, through collective bargaining, have, in many cases, partly, one could argue, because of the favorable tax treatment, made sort of wage concessions in exchange for more generous. Generous is such a weird word. It's so freighted, actually, semantically, and it gets used all the time. I mean, generous implies a conceptual relationship between employer-employee that is like sort of feudal and serf-like. I mean,
so expansive is one way you could put it.
Right? Expansive, or concomitant with the value that the labor provides to the firm.
Yes.
So anyway, you have this dilemma. Labor was really tipped off about this, and part of this, look, one of the things I think your sort of Obamanomics frame highlights is that, when you kind of start auctioning off policy, it sets a precedent in which, look, if I was running a labor union, I would say, wait a second. We're going to take the hit on this?
Yeah.
My members who are, remember, we negotiated these contracts in good faith, and when you add in the premium of the tax exclusion, we were negotiating for, contracts that were worth X. There's now going to be some ex post facto depreciation of that value.
And simply, you cannot forget the unions contributed heavily and did independent expenditures in the tens of millions to elect Barack Obama president and the hundreds of millions to elect the Democrats to control Congress. So, I mean, the arguments you're making about, wait a second, part of the reason we cut these deals was because of the special tax treatment. If we knew this tax plan wasn't going to be there, we wouldn't have negotiated this. It would be like getting rid of the home interest mortgage deduction and thus, sending homeowners up a raft. People have made a certain deal.
That's right.
Betting on special tax treatment. But on the other hand, it is simply put, the Democrats are making a tax hike and exempting their most dedicated political patrons.
Now, well, we should be a little more precise about this, and I'm not going to. I mean, this is interest group politics, no question. It's sausage making, and it's not really defensible in any sort of abstract conceptual way. It's defensible in sort of the sense of hard coalition politics. I mean, we should say that they're not exempting, right? They're postponing.
Yes, the tax would hit the unions in 2018, I guess.
That's right.
So it's going to
be 4 years later, and part of the idea there, which there's actually some policy rationale, right, which is that there's enough window there that most of the contracts are going to come up for renewal in the interim, and so you can go to the contracting table in which the full value of the future plan is now going to be priced in, and you can have a tabula rasa. You're not having this kind of retroactive, depreciation of the value of what you've negotiated. So there's some, but yes, look, I mean, it is, it's coalition politics, plain and simple. And I think, if you're a union, and I support unions, with all my heart and soul, even, in fact, I would say I support them even when I disagree with them, because I think that they are, generally good for the power distribution of this country. This is a kind of, existential issue, because delivering good healthcare benefits has come to define in the current situation what labor unions probably do best for their members.
And I think there will be, I mean, just the way I articulate it as a dirty deal is much easier to explain if, we'll take a step back and try to be a disinterested political observer. The optics, I guess that's the word people use now. The optics of this is really bad. Obama is buying off his donors with this, and I wonder about the Democrats. I mean, there's not too many Southern Democrats, but there's been a surge in that where there's not high unionization, or anywhere where there's not high union membership. I think Phil Klein of the American Spectator was the one who put on Twitter today that there are 25 vulnerable Democrats in districts with less than 10% union rate. In each one of those races, to say your health care costs are going up, your taxes may be going up, but if you're in a union that supported Obama, guess what? They're not. I mean, this is another reason for Democrats to be worried about the political ramifications.
Yeah, no, I agree. The optics aren't great. I will, again, just so that we're sort of precise here. The U in that ad, right? I mean, not that this will matter to the ads, because the ads will get run regardless. The U is quite small. I mean, so we should be clear that the quote unquote Cadillac tax, it's plans that are worth $23,000 annually. That is a ton of money, and I think that's
but I was trying to say that it's not just people who are hit by the taxes who are hurt by this, arguably. I would argue, and this is too big of an argument to have here, but I would argue that the bill is going to drive up health insurance costs for most people, especially in the short term. And you can at least politically make that argument that your health insurance costs are going up in a bill that was paid for and was bought off, politically was paid for buying off Nebraska and buying off the unions.
If healthcare in the short term, if healthcare costs in the short term, so you're saying that you think they'll go up in the short term before the actual implementation of the exchange and subsidy mechanism?
I think that the fact of, and before that even the promise of the no pre-existing condition, the limits on the price discrimination, community rating, the guaranteed issue, all of that will have an upward pressure on price. And
in the short term it may, although that's something where there you can't, that's a place where you can't hang it on corporatism, right?
No.
Because that's actually... That's just risk pooling, right? That's the logic of social insurance, right? So there's a redistribution happening. What all social insurance does when it's functioning is it redistributes from the sick to the healthy.
Though I will say that the guaranteed issue and the community rating was first put on the table seriously by AHIP, the health insurance lobby, who said, this was something that people have been agitating for. I don't know. The regulations probably exist in Europe or Canada.
They exist everywhere. Yeah. Every universal system, whether it's from Switzerland to Amsterdam to Canada to England.
The private insurers said, and they said it particularly loudly right after Obama won, we'll go for those regulations if it's paired with an individual mandate, which again, from a policy perspective, makes sense because, as everybody's saying with the promise of a low individual mandate penalty, if there's guaranteed issue, I will take my whole family off of insurance until it comes up to the point that our expenses would exceed the premiums.
Those two have to go together. I mean, the way to do it in a less Rube Goldberg fashion is just to expand Medicare, and then you're not dealing with this mandate. But you bring up AHIP, which I think actually is a useful segue to a topic I think you and I want to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that let's say the anti-corporatist critique of particularly the Senate version of the healthcare bill.
Yes.
A critique that is shared by yourself and people at Fire Dog Lake, particularly on the left, is basically that this is...
And Howard Dean.
That this is essentially a giveaway to the health insurance companies.
Can I try to...
How about you articulate your critique rather than me?
Primarily, it's a giveaway to the drug companies, but it's also it does function as a transfer of wealth from regular people, whether it be a patient or a taxpayer in whatever capacity, from regular people to health insurance companies. So the drug deal, I mean, they cut that deal back in August. Rahm Emanuel and Billy Tozan, the top drug industry lobbyists, and the drug industry not only got continued ban on reimportation, continued ban on Medicare negotiating down prices, which, by the way, from a conservative free market perspective, I don't see a justification for banning Medicare from negotiating on drugs that Medicare subsidizes.
That's what we were all screaming during the Medicare Part D battle, that all the free marketeers were telling us that it was government, putting a thumb on the scale.
Well, the free marketeers I hung out with were saying that the whole idea was horrible.
Right. That's fair enough.
And so the drug industries are the big winners. They also get subsidies. There's also little tiny things for the drug companies, like if you have a health savings account, you used to be able to buy over-the-counter medicines with your health savings account money, pre-tax money. Right. But now under the Senate bill, you couldn't do that. So if I go to buy, Pedialyte or Children's Motrin for my kids, then I used to be able to basically get the tax deduction on that, and now you can't. So there's all sorts of favors for the drug companies. We know they pledged $150 million for ads. They started taking out Harry and Louise ads in favor of the bill, and the drug companies have hired a ton of Democratic lobbyists who have lined up behind Democratic candidates. The insurers obviously have the way they put it now is it's complicated. They're neither broken up, they're neither the enemies of the bill, nor are they rallying behind any specific bill. They came out opposed to the House bill, and then on the Senate bill, if you read their statement about it, it was, we support the general idea of reform, which obviously is, it's a vacant comment. Anyone can say.
Sure.
We support a lot of the regulations in here, but some specific provisions would actually make healthcare more expensive for people. So they had a mixed statement on that. But the basic thing that I object to is Barack Obama's claiming that he's battling against the health insurance companies while pushing a bill making it illegal for me not to buy their product, while pushing a bill that taxes people to subsidize the purchase of health insurance. So there are huge corporate giveaways to the health insurance industry here. So to argue that this is somehow a broadside to the industry always seemed disingenuous. But I'll let you tell the...
Right, so first of all, we should let's just stipulate that I basically agree entirely on what you said about pharma. I mean, I don't think that's even disputable. I think that now the motivations from that, if you talk to people in the White House, they basically say, pharma is what is it? The second most profitable industry in the U.S., the third most profitable.
It's in the top, and it also is the number one industry as far as spending on lobbying.
Yeah, I mean, they're just massively powerful. They have a ton of money, and the White House rationale is basically if we didn't make this deal with the devil, they would have killed it outright. Now. Health insurance the insurance companies and AHIP is a trickier thing, and I think that it's been overstated. I think a little bit in the critique of how much this is quote unquote a giveaway to the health insurance companies, and I think there's a few things to note. Which is not to say that I am, a huge fan of the mandate and subsidy approach. I mean, I am a tried and true single payer believer. So the there was news in terms of fighting the insurance companies. I agree that it rankles a little bit because it does come off as disingenuous. But there was an interesting story in the National Journal the other day that basically said while AHIP was saying, yes, we support reform, they were funneling $20 million into the Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce was running all the anti-reform ads and trying to sort of knock it down. And there has been a tremendous amount of entrenched interest spending against the bill and against any kind of reform, some of it being laundered by the very insurance industry that was claiming that it was on board. So I think that I think cuts against a bit. It complicates the picture of this being some kind of unalloyed, quote, giveaway to the insurance companies.
Yes,
because giveaway, let me just finish that sentence. Yeah. Giveaway implies that there is no trade-off, right? So, and I don't think that's accurate. I don't think you can say even the Senate bill is quote-unquote a giveaway to industry.
Okay, but if you read that National Journal lead again, I don't have it in front of me now, but it said the money being spent was to oppose or significantly alter the health insurance bills. And, I mean, the most significant alteration happened between the House and the Senate version, and that was the abolition of the government option, the public option. Right. And there were other alterations that are made as well. If I've seen Karen Ignani, she's a head of AHIP, the top healthcare lobbyist. I've seen her in action, and people would ask her about the public option, and she wouldn't even say, oh no, this is horrible. I mean, Tom Donahue's the head of the Chamber of Commerce. If he dislikes something even a little bit, he'll start throwing out, F-bombs and that sort of thing. Yeah. Karen Ignani, ask her about if you were to ask her about single payer, she probably wouldn't. Wouldn't even say that's horrible. Right. Her response on the government option was, well, we understand what that's trying to accomplish, and that patients do need We have looked into it, and we believe a better way to accomplish it is X, Y, and Z. So her whole thing is the opposite of a Tom Donahue of putting your cards on the table like that. And it's about it's both never saying that's horrible, we're against it. Lobbyists, that's how you get locked out of a room by doing that. Right. But also never by saying this is exactly what we're looking for, because that's the point when you stop being able to ask for more. And then beyond that, if they came out for a bill that they actually liked. I mean, for example, I knew a lot of Tom DeLay staffers, and DeLay always wanted to come out on one side of an issue that didn't have to do with his district in Texas. And his staff would say, no, if you come out for this candidate in the special election, wherever, they'll never win. I mean, it's why Jim DeMint isn't endorsing Scott Brown in Massachusetts right now. Right. Or it's why Dennis Kucinich isn't endorsing, well, maybe you can put a flip side on that one in Mass. But anyway, so where is it a giveaway to the insurance industry? That is an oversimplification way of putting it. Yeah. And I have spent, 10 months now, more than that, writing about how Obama is not, in fact, waging a war against the industry. And if at times I've written that, industry loves this whole idea and loves all of these bills, that was off base. But I think mostly what I've said is this is not a question of reformers versus industry. Yeah, it is if you're talking Bernie Sanders or the nation, then yes, it is reformers versus industry. Right. But if you're talking about actual legislative action,
that's right. And actually, so this is an interesting thing, right? Because and we should talk about Massachusetts, but there's sort of a natural segue here. I mean, this is the thing that I was most excited to engage you on, because I have been, for people that are not reading Tim's writing, they really should be. I will say that the stuff you've been writing is the stuff that I've been on the right that I've been reading the most closely and found the most useful and provocative. So it's very good reporting, and I think. Yes, let's establish that it's neither the fact that this is a big plan to sort of give away the store to industry, nor is it this proud sort of a David and Goliath, a battle of the people versus the powerful industry, the reformers versus the powerful industry. What's interesting to me, one of the things you do is because I think you view these large corporate entities with an appropriate degree of skepticism, and particularly the kind of rent-seeking they engage in Washington. You're constantly sort of tweaking liberals, I think in a productive way, to say, hey guys, look, you're the person that's in the party, putatively representing you is in bed with this person.
And with Obama, I can go further. The guy you rallied behind. I mean,
that's
almost.
right. Yeah.
Am I right that liberals rallied behind this guy?
Yeah, no, that's unquestionably true. I mean,
it's not like this is Bill Clinton. I'm
right. Yes, that's right. No, and it's fair, and I think that the tweaking hurts because it gets at something that's not super far.
I'm not just trying to hurt you, though, Chris.
But that said, right, the next logical. I mean, I think the where you go from there is the interesting thing. So even if there's a recognition of the diagnosis of this, a shared critique that I think a lot of people on the left have with you about this corporatism, the fusing of big government and big business.
Yes.
That where you go from there, there's a divergence, and I want to press you on that a little bit.
Okay,
right? So
let's
talk about the public option, right? The insurance industry has a pretty good sense of what would help them and what would hurt them. I think they're not perfectly rationally self-interested, but they're and they fought to kill the public option from day one. I think that was unambiguous. I mean, they really drew a line in the sand on that, and they did everything in their power to kill it, and they killed it. Now, I think it's hard not to conclude the public option would have taken power away from the industry.
Okay, well,
if you think the industry is too powerful, then how do you end up in the place where? So I guess my question is: do you support the public option, and if not, why not?
Now, obviously, I don't support the public option. I think it's unconstitutional. I'm not going to pipe up and say, "Oh, we'll destroy the private insurance industry," because I think these are companies that do a lot of evil things, and they're not. I admire enterprise. I admire people who make profits. I admire entrepreneurs. I don't think that's what the health insurance industry is. I think it's existed off of government protection and regulations that kill competition. But let me give you a couple sort of, from the filter of Obamanomics, a couple arguments against it, because most conservative, Megan McArdle makes all the arguments about why it could never, in fact, be fair competition. I mean, who prosecutes Medicare fraud? It's not Medicare, it's DOJ. There's lots of the standard good free market arguments that other people can make much better than I can. What I'll say is two things. One is, and this is what you and your nation piece critiqued as my fatalism, which is things like the public option just don't really happen. Things that really would hurt the most affected parties, where there's a more concentrated cost than there is a benefit. The benefit would be diffuse, and the cost would be to the industry, and it would sink them. The second thing is from the perspective of good government. And let me say this on good government, clean government, and transparency. Very few people actually hold clean government and transparency as the highest good, and I don't. I mean, I hold individual liberty, right. But Obama played that line up a lot, and the Democratic Party in the 08
if they were conspiring behind closed doors right now to radically rein in the size of government, you'd be okay with that. Yeah.
Yes, but on the score of clean government, when you have one insurer in the whole country, and it's the government, do you think it's going to be... I think a lot of liberals have the idea of these competitive effectiveness research and some scholars and some MIT people, and probably Nate Silver all in a room deciding what should be covered to what extent and what should not be covered. But we know that politics will play a huge role. Watch what happened when a study came out, remember, suggesting that maybe women in their 40s that spending money on mammograms is not the most cost-efficient thing to do with that money. Huge political uproar. Do you really think that would be allowed to go through? So then the flip side of just those, politically broadly unpopular things like mammograms, from my perspective as a libertarian but also a social conservative, you start to worry about what else are they going to start doing. And, you get into crazy conspiracy theory things, but what if my family's too big and the government decides that, a family of 7, 8 kids isn't worth covering? And so you get into those, but back to the good government question. Think AHIP and Pharma and Pfizer. I guess, do General Electric and Pfizer spend a lot of money on lobbying now? Imagine if it was only government that got to make the decisions. And you're not going to firewall it and make it be bureaucrats with tables and charts doing the math. It's going to be politicians. It's going to be Max Baucus making the decision. Right. It's going to be the guy who has the mammogram maker, General Electric, in his district, or whose former chief of staff is now a lobbyist for Pfizer, who's deciding that it's Viagra that's going to get covered. So those are two critiques just that I don't think are made enough of the single-payer plan. But ultimately it comes down to, my belief belief in the limits of government partly being set by the Constitution, and that it would end up abusing its power.
Right. So I think it's a few responses. I mean, one is that when we have these arguments about healthcare, it's useful that there really are other countries that, I mean, we are an outlier, right? And so, there are people in Canada with 7 kids, should be stipulated, and 8 kids, and the government hasn't told them to not have another kid. A lot of I think what maybe I think I can find some common ground on is that the political culture of America, I think, is pretty corrupt right now. And so, but that I think is mutable. So there's actually a real kind of range of the degrees of corruption, the degrees of rent seeking that happen in welfare states and democracies that have large public sectors. And so that's what I think I mean by fatalism, is that, look, there actually over time within the U.S. have been oscillations of more and less corruption, more and less corrupt political cultures. So the notion that, when you sort of raise the specter of this will necessarily, single payer or increased government encroachment will necessarily produce these more corrupt outcomes, which I think is essentially the critique. Aside from the more philosophical, ideological critique, which that'll constrain freedom, but we're not going to agree on that, right? I mean, we're not going to agree on the relative value of that versus equality or whatever. But so on this sort of outcome-based argument, I just think that it is fatalistic, unnecessarily so, simply because there are both examples in our past. I mean, we did create Medicare, which gave, which was really opposed. Let's remember, by the AMA, Ronald Reagan was going around the country, on the AMA's dime, trying to defeat Medicare, right? They were organizing coffee clatches with his record spinning on the table, saying that it was socialized medicine. The providers really didn't want that to happen, and it did happen, and Medicare is remarkably popular, and it has the slowest rate of increase of costs. And also, Medicare isn't something where the kind of dystopic libertarian scenarios have played out. There's no death panels, yada yada yada. So
let me add a little bit more. This will feed one of your earlier arguments, while maybe disagreeing with a later one. Part of it is just how thoroughly socialistic Medicare is, and this is part of my point, is that we end up with these third ways, these mixed economies, and that's where the opportunities for corruption and for the dealing work in, and that's because simple economics of there's and to take a step back to the health insurance lobbies, there is a very interesting thing. What's in the best interest of AHIP is not necessarily what's in the best interest of Aetna and Cigna. Also, what's in the best interest of Blue Cross is not the same as Mutual of Omaha, not the same as Health South.
It's a very good point. And
the lobbyists often have a stake in increasing government control over their industry because that increases the relevance of the lobbyists. It's called the principal agent problem. In addition, you got CEOs. I mean, the best interest of Aetna is itself a nebulous term. What does that mean? The best interest of Aetna's shareholders today? What about the shareholders who want to sell in 5 years? What about the CEO, who's actually the actual agent in this case? He's going to be retired in 20 years when the Senate bill now, I think, long-term is disastrous for the insurance companies, partly because it's by having the guaranteed issue community rating, it's a transfer of wealth from younger, healthy people to older, sick people, which, you probably don't think is a bad thing. But standing in the middle, there's this profit-taking middleman. I think eventually that guy's going to be run out of town. But the CEOs...
I hope so.
This is why, Ezra Klein is right, is that it's like the deal is a path, and, you guys do better at incrementalism than my side does. But to take another step back, generally when government's getting involved in something, and the question that a CEO who's responsible to his shareholders or just worried about his own fate has to ask is, what should I do? Should I hire, David Castignetti for $50,000 a quarter to go there and try to tweak this thing to drive up my profits? Of course he's going to do that. I mean, you'd have to be a dumb business to not try to game the system, or you'd have to be a business that believes it's wrong to game the system. Right. Now, there are businesses like that, and they're entrepreneurs. I think Whole Foods is one of them. They're businesses run by people who don't just want to get rich. This is one of the critiques I often have of my libertarian friends. They think the point of business is simply to make money. No, if you think about Thomas Edison or a lot of these entrepreneurs originally, they wanted to also be awesome, not just rich. I'm going to go out and I'm going to change the world. I'm going to walk down the street and just be totally awesome. And they then die and pass the company down to their sons, or they go public.
People who do not care about awesomeness.
And they're managers who A, aren't as confident in their own ability. B, are, if it's a publicly traded corporation, now actually are not allowed to worry about awesomeness, but only allowed to worry about shareholder interest, which means profit and some view of long-term profitability. So the managerial type corporation, which is most big businesses, is going to engage in rent seeking, is going to engage in Obamanomics. I use the word subsidy suckling and regulatory robbery. They will engage in those. And whoever has the best lobbyist is going to win. Who gets to hire Max Baucus's old chief of staff? Who gets to hire Chris Dodd's chief of staff? Right. It's not mom and pop. It's not sick grandma.
Not
Yes, or Byron Dorgan or Chris Dodd. Who gets to hire them? Right. It's the people who have the most money. And so that's sort of the form of my argument as to why. And again, I will make the distinction. If it's thoroughly socialist and like Medicare kind of is, then maybe it's not open to that sort of gaming.
Right, exactly. And I think I guess that's all, that's my only point from the. I agree with you about the exact. I'm in the midst, I think, of trying with some other people, and on this book that I'm working on that kind of. What you said before about distributed benefit and concentrated pain is sort of right out of public choice theory. And of course, there's an entire public choice literature that is very prominent out of places like George Mason and on the right. And it's a literature that is created to both substantively describe the way that private actors interact with the government to create to enrich themselves, to create inefficiencies, etc. Yep. And also as a kind of argument against the enlargement of the state sphere, right? It's marshaled in that way.
Yes.
And I think, I'm interested in the project of sort of taking a lot of those insights, which I think they're proving to have a certain robustness with them, and apply them in a critique that moves in the direction of more socialism. Because I do think that Medicare is an example when you do get rid of these, it just has not been gamed in the same way. Now, that's not to say it's not gamed at all. In fact, gaming is sort of part of politics at any level, no matter. But I guess my second point I kind of want to hear you talk about is, the alternative. So the question is, what's the alternative, right? And I think the alternative for you, as I understand in Obamanomics, and for other people that share the critique, is smaller government.
Yes. There was an old writer for National Review named Timothy Wheeler, and he coined a phrase we call Wheeler's Law, which is the only way to get rid of corruption in the high places is to get rid of the high places. Right. And that's laid very simple. That's the way to get rid of, every time, I call the laws of Obamanomics number one, I think, is every time there's a congressional debate or a regulatory debate, whoever has the best lobbyist is the guy that wins. And and Billy Tozan's winner number one, and AMA and the unions might come out in a tie for second, and the health insurers, we're going to see whether they just lose or come in a decent fourth.
Right. But so here I want to make my own fatalistic argument in response to that, right? So let's say that there's we have this kind of shared corporatist critique about the both inequities and inefficiencies of this sort of big government, big business bedfellowship. Now, the people of the nation and the Bernie Sanders response is move in the direction of Medicare to sort of eliminate the private sector from sort of central state functions, like, for instance, social insurance and risk pooling. And the libertarian argument is to, get rid of the high places, you say.
Yeah.
Now, I actually think, not just from a philosophical perspective, obviously we're both approaching it from a philosophical perspective, but practically there's a lot more evidence in the past for my solution than yours, which is to say, all the government has done is grown. No one ever shrinks it. The only time the government has really shrunk significantly is the demobilization after World War II. But
there are stories I can give you, and in the Big Ripoff, my '06 book, I gave a couple. Airline deregulation, where the airlines liked the oligopolies they had. And what it took there was that Ted Kennedy happened to have Stephen Breyer on his staff, and that Stephen Breyer happened to understand what was going on.
Well, and Ralph Nader waged that campaign as well.
And so that was corporatism, big government, that actually got peeled back. But even short of peeling things back, and I do think that, I do think the Republicans are blameworthy during their majority for not doing some of the good things to peel back the government obstacles to markets actually functioning and health insurance. But beyond that, most of what we spend our time doing, other conservative libertarian writers, is opposing bad stuff. And now there's a lot more bad stuff to oppose, but even under Republicans. We were opposing No Child Left Behind. We were opposing Medicare Part D. We, to the degree that we could, that we were getting drowned out by everybody else. A lot of us were opposing the Wall Street bailout and certainly the Detroit bailout. So, and now I just listed a bunch of things that we lost. If you give me a hard enough time, I'll come up with one that we win. We might win climate change. We killed, Lieberman Warner. We killed McCain Lieberman, and right now that's looking bad. And that's a huge corporatist mess with GE, selling made up carbon credits, and Duke Energy kneecapping their opponents who actually Nike kneecapping their opponents who actually manufacture in the United States by hitting them with a carbon tax. Alcoa is doing a similar sort of game. There's all sorts of big business, big government stuff going on there. And the liberal answer is, let's have either a cap and trade with no carve-outs at all, or a carbon tax. I'm not but
or 100% auction.
Yeah, and my answer is no. Let's kill it altogether. And my option is much more likely today. So this is a case where I think that it's more likely we just kill this than it is to get a 100% auction thing. Because the whole plan of cap and trade got all of its momentum from the excited corporate lobby led by General Electric and a couple other big companies rallying for it.
Well, do you think, I guess my question is, do you think that I think there's a tension a little bit in Obamanomics because it's a mix of both reporting in the moment now and also it's coming out of a worldview that has this more existential critique. Do you think, my sense is that it really has gotten worse. And it's not necessarily, now, the libertarian critique of why it's gotten worse because government's gotten better. As opposed to on the sort of money side, right? So that's the kind of left account for it, is that there's a lot more money.
But I can give an account of it getting worse because government's getting bigger, which is to say that we see that the lobbyists react to, they're getting regulated, they're getting taxed, and the subsidies getting handed out, and the tax carve-outs multiplying, tax rates, I guess tax rates haven't gone up, but tax carve-outs multiplying. So that's the account, is you see government playing a more active role in the economy through the whole Bush administration, especially the second half of it in the early Obama administration. What's the liberals' argument for why there's more money in lobbying now? Why there are more lobbyists now?
Why are there more lobbyists now?
Why is there much more lobbying now than there was 8 years ago? I gave my story.
Well, I think because they have, I think it's sort of an autocatalytic process, and I think it's largely the case that I would say three things. One is that the society has gotten more unequal. Wealth has been concentrated, and therefore that wealth, it's much easier to plow concentrated wealth into a political system than distributed wealth, right? So, and this gets exactly to the public choice point, right? The classic public choice example is the ag subsidies, in which everyone's going to pay a little more for sugar, but those you can't organize all the 300 million people paying more for sugar. The sugar industry can organize, right?
Yes.
If you concentrate money in a society, and when the share of profits tilt towards capital away from labor, as they have over, say, the last 20, 30 years, then it enables exactly this process. And I think, that's my like broad political economy account of what's happening. In terms of from 8 years to the next, I basically think it's just essentially been a monotonic trend for about 25 years. You know what I mean? I mean, yes, you can pick 8 years, but you can also pick 10 or 12 or 14. I think if you tracked the number of lobbyist filings, and you actually probably have done this, maybe there's some perorations, but it's that's the wrong word. It moves up and down a little bit, but overall, I'd imagine the trend is fairly consistent, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I really have only looked at the numbers from. I mean, they were only online from 1999 till now, so it's really only last decade that we know.
Right. We should talk about this because we need to be somewhat topical. We should talk about Massachusetts before we end this, right? The news just out a few minutes ago is that the president's going to go to Massachusetts on Sunday to campaign for Coakley, the embattled Democratic candidate for Senate in the special election. And things look like they are genuinely a toss-up right now, much to the consternation and indeed despair of Democrats. What do you think accounts for the situation?
Well, the one thing is the Republicans recently have realized, just in the last, once it started to get a little bit close, it became clear how big of a win this would be, especially because some of it can be attributed to fears about the health care bill, that all of a sudden you just make that many more Democrats that much more scared about backing Obama's agenda if you knock this one off. And taking it to 41 senators is huge. So once Republicans realized there's actually something going on here, the money started pouring in from all over the country of people saying this is our chance to win. This is the first real chance to stick something to Obama, Reid, and Pelosi. I think part of it has to do with the fact that, the Martha Coakley Cree Deeds analogy that David Weigel always uses is that she stopped campaigning. I mean, she even made fun of Scott Brown for standing outside Fenway Park shaking hands in the cold. She said, what am I supposed to do? Shake hands in the cold outside Fenway Park? And so part of it is that. And also, I think that I wonder, and this is what I'd ask you, I wonder if there's any disenchantment on the left about, A, this candidate who didn't seem to care, B, this candidate who wasn't the most progressive in the primary, as far as I know, and then C, especially recently, it's clear that she, and this is some of the reporting I did at the Examiner, that she is the favorite by far of the Washington lobbyist scene, including the drug industry lobbyists. And so I'll let you talk about the progressives, but my theory is that a lot of these people who've seen, Max Baucus grab their football and run away with it now think Coakley's just another one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing a big part of what accounts for it. Special elections are notoriously low turnout affairs. Yep. They're notoriously driven by base enthusiasm, and that's part of the reason that the Democrats were able to win two different special election House seats
right before 2008. Yeah,
right before 2008 in districts that they really had no business winning whatsoever. And right now, there is just no question that there is a monumental gap in enthusiasm between the right space and the left space.
Yeah, and by the way, Scott Brown's not a conservative. He's not pro-life. He's not a small government guy, but he's vote number 41 against healthcare, and he's sticking it to Obama. So, I mean, it's an anti-Harry Reid vote more than anything.
That's right. And, of course, it's always, what the left learned in its out years is that, it's always easier to organize an opposition.
Yes.
And we're seeing that now. And, we're also seeing this sort of fascinating, if you abstract this kind of iterative process of each side kind of learning from the other. So, you have the money bomb that's been put together and a lot of grassroots enthusiasm. But I do think that there is I think it's two things, actually. I think it's you have a somewhat depressed base right now. I also think the country is in a really pissed off mood because things suck. And what happens when people are pissed off and things suck is they're angry at the people that are in power, and Democrats are in power. And to be totally honest, I don't think it takes a ton more analysis than that few sentences.
And you think, well, why should that apply to the Attorney General? But I do think it gets transposed onto power. I remember in 2002, a majority of the governor races, the party power switch hands. And that was just, where people manifested their anger at the economy. And I think you're right that, the suckiness about the economy, about Afghanistan and Iraq, Afghanistan getting worse and more troops getting there, etc. I think she's bearing a lot of the
And I think,
brunt.
It's been so long since we've had, 10% unemployment is brutal. I mean, I don't know if, I think particularly the Washington political class, because Washington, thanks to exactly the sort of political economy that you document so aptly, is, booming, that there's just there is, this is the oldest cliche in the world to say there's a huge disconnect. But it's particularly true right now when you look at Washington has the fastest growing regional GDP in the nation, if I'm not mistaken, at the moment.
Yep, and last time they counted, three of the three richest counties were all within commuting distance of the capital. I mean,
commercial. There was a story out the other day about commercial real estate here is leveling off. Approaching New York. So all of this, but my means of saying there is, I wonder if, and I think Democratic elected representatives, House members and senators get it. They really do get calls and emails, and they go home to their district. They're not insulated from it, but I wonder how much the kind of political class is. And I think, this is why, they better, I think, pass this healthcare bill in the short term, but mostly just because of, I think it will have the long-range effects that you think it will for the insurance companies. But also they need to do something on jobs. And then finally, I think, to be totally honest, I'm glad that Coakley is, and now I'm going to sound sort of cynical, but, I'm glad that Coakley is making an issue of Brown's opposition to this bank user fee, which I think is a perfectly good idea. But you know what? It's very hard, I'm sorry, for the Democrats to have a ton of credibility on this issue a year after this. And, I don't doubt necessarily the genuineness of Coakley, and I think the administration believes in this bank fee. But they have coddled the banks for a year. And so, you don't get to cash in your reputational capital if you erode it. And I think it's pretty eroded right now.
And the flip side of that question is, Republicans are not going to be the sort of, the Carnesian Republican Party. If I was the head of the Republican Party, I would say, okay, everybody go out there and run against pharma, okay? Right. Make Billy Tozan be the big enemy and run against corporate welfare and run against corporatism. But no, just today I saw in the bookstore, Michael Medved, one of the top 3 or 4 conservative radio hosts, with a book defending big business. And it's like, okay, and too many Republicans, they're politicians and they need the donors. B, I just think it's a cant. It's Republicans say we're pro-business. They stick up for business. They still think they're battling against Ralph Nader. I felt bad. I like Tom Coburn. I felt bad when he pulled the stunt delaying Bernie Sanders single-payer amendment. Because I was saying Bernie Sanders isn't the bad guy here. Yeah, single-payer is absolutely horrible, but strategically and tactically, Max Baucus is the guy that conservatives need to worry about. And, so there are a couple Republicans who catch this. I think Jim DeMint catches it. I think you'll see challengers catch it of the incumbent and the leadership. And one of the things I think about is if you get a lot of challengers who come in sort of crusading, waving the free market populist flag, and then all of a sudden they go to work for John Boehner and Mitch McConnell, who were both, Captain Bailout, then what's that awkwardness going to be like? Yeah,
and let me give a dose of my own fatalism here. Anyone who thinks that the Republican Party is going to be a vessel for a free market anti-corporate populist insurgents in America is more deluded than the Obama bot masses that the right likes to mock for believing that, quote, hope and change would solve everything. I think
I sadly agree, but I think it can be a little bit more, especially if we're highlighting that again. They have pharma and General Electric on the left has pharma and General Electric on their side. General Electric, which is
right. But what's interesting is that
corporation.
Is that the cultural DNA of the Republican Party and the Republican coalition is so intense that even though I think that taking your advice would be politically expedient, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of it.
No, and they haven't. And when they critiqued the healthcare bill, it was only after Howard Dean did it that you started to get some of them critiquing it as a corporate giveaway.
That was the funniest thing to me. You had this whole. I was going on TV and radio and talking about the healthcare debate, particularly in August, right? Mm-hmm. And I kept saying, the weirdest thing about this whole thing is there is a whole set of conservative critiques of the actual bill. Like, for instance, the mandate. There's there's a libertarian critique against the mandate that no one's making because everyone's talking about death panels and putting down.
They're talking about death panels, or they're talking about the public option, or they were just talking about the liberals want to cut Medicare spending.
Right. Yes. Exactly. That was really my favorite through the looking glass moment of this whole debate. So yeah, I mean, I think that showed that when there is an opportunity to make the kind of Carnesian arguments, I think except for a very few small examples and obviously some sort of writers, bloggers, and so forth, I haven't really seen
on the floor of the House during the global warming debate, the only one to call it out as a corporate pork fest was Pete Stark, one of the most liberal guys from San Francisco.
Right. Well, on that note of relative comedy, we should probably wrap up and begin our weekends. But I really enjoyed it, and again, everyone should check out Tim's book, Obamanomics.
Well, then let me endorse Chris's system failure in the latest Nation. His big recap on Obama 1 year, not just because it mentions me.
We'll get links up to it. Thanks a lot, Tim. Be well, man.
Great, thank you.
Okay.